is Vicki Birkby. I'm the second of 4 daughters belonging to Doug and Doreen Williams Ashcraft. I, along with my cousin Gary Williams, want to tell our family history to keep it alive for generations that will follow us. My mother, currently the oldest living child of Bert and Mary Elizabeth Trent Williams, was extremely proud of her heritage, especially as it relates to the settlement of the Oregon Territory and the founding of the Oregon Institute, now known as Willamette University. She spent hours researching, documenting, and collecting information about her family's role as early Oregon pioneers. So today, let me share with you what I believe is an accurate account of our family's story about Alanson Beers. I hope it will spark interest for other family members and honors my mother's hard work. First, I need to tell you about the Jason Lee mission. Jason Lee was a Canadian sent to the Oregon Territory to bring Christianity to the Indians. The American Board of Commissions for Foreign Missions had been working to convert Indians since 1816 when they set up a mission among the Cherokee. Explorers Lewis and Clark had reported that Indians were curious about the power of the white man's Book of Heaven. 4 Flathead Indians from the Oregon Territory traveled 3,000 miles to find General William Clark in St. Louis. They wanted to know about the Book of Directions that will teach them how to conduct themselves in order to enjoy his favor and be received into his country where the Great Spirit resides and live forever with him. In 1829, the Boston-based group of missionaries, which made up the Board of Commissioners, received a report from the Sandwich Islands Mission about the abundance of unconverted Indians in the west coast of North America. As a result of this report, they commissioned Captain Jonas Green to explore the Oregon coast. Over a 2-year effort, Captain Green named 34 tribes of Indians on the Pacific Northwest coast that he believed needed religious instruction. His report reached Boston in 1832. This resulted in their decision to begin a mission work to the Pacific Northwest, and Jason Lee was selected to lead the missionary efforts in this area. In April of 1837, Jason Lee contacted Nathaniel Wyeth to travel with the second trading expedition to the western lands. At Fort Vancouver, John McLaughlin, the Hudson Bay fur factor, suggested the area that became known as Mission Bottom near present-day Salem to be the site of this mission. Upon his arrival to Oregon, Jason Lee and his group pitched tents and started building an onion log cabin. They also built a boarding school for Native American children from across the Pacific Northwest. This boarding school closed after only 2 years, as sadly the native population dwindled rapidly because of white man diseases such as malaria, smallpox, measles, flu, and syphilis. Of the more than 40 Kalapalua students who attended, over half became ill or ran away. Lee began to rethink his role in the resettlement. It was a chaotic time of transition. He was convinced that a stable, non-native community in the Willamette Valley would best facilitate the interests of the Methodist Church. Lee called upon his mentor, Dr. Fisk, asking for reinforcements from the Methodist Episcopal Church. His letter stated that without the able assistance of tradesmen and farmers to oversee the day-to-day details of running the mission, there was little time available for the business of religion. His request for reinforcements was granted. Alanson Beers, Mom's great-great-grandfather, was one of those sent in the first reinforcement. Alanson was the son of a soldier of the Revolutionary War. He was born in Fairfield, Connecticut, March 17, 1804. While living in Connecticut, he learned to be a blacksmith. He married Rachel Beersley, November 17, 1830. He, along with his wife and 3 of their children, Sarah, Eleanor, and Benjamin, came to Oregon in May of 1837. After Alanson and Rachel arrived in Oregon, they had 6 more children: Joseph, Abigail, William, Oliver, David, who died as an infant, and Jonathan. We have no picture of Alanson Beers. Mom recalls a portrait of him hanging in the Trent home in Richmond. It was a side view of him, so only one of his eyes was shown. At the time, she didn't know who the portrait was. Later, when she told her brother Homer about the scary-looking man who stared at her all through the night, Homer told her the portrait was of Alanson Beers. We do not know what happened to that portrait. The Trent home, well known to locals in Richmond, Oregon, was built in 1903 as a boarding home and purchased by John Trent in 1909 for $600. It still stands today. It was sold at a public auction due to delinquent taxes. The family wonders if the portrait of Alanson Beers was hanging on the wall at the time of the auction. Dr. White was a man who traveled to Oregon with Alanson Beers. He described Alanson as a man of low stature, rather dark complexion, rigid, puritanical manners, and well-versed in Scripture, ever stoutly and insisting all come to his landmark, his righteous and soul chafing solely at the least departure of his friends from his golden rule. Being rather bilious, it increased the authority of his manners, which failed to render him a favorite with either crew or passengers. Mrs. Beers was of medium height, round-favored, philosophical turn of mind, docile, quiet in temperament, and perfectly obedient to her husband, as the reader might suppose she had better be after the above description of him. Alanson and Rachel left the port of Boston in July of 1836 aboard the ship Hamilton, bound for the Sandwich Islands, which are now known as the Hawaiian Islands. The ship sailed around the Horn of South America. They disembarked in Hawaii and boarded the brig Diana for their voyage to Portland. On a side note, some sources list that Alanson Beers' family arrived on the Louisiana. This is incorrect. The Louisiana brought over the great reinforcement. The Beers family came with the first reinforcement. Another side note, the women who arrived on Diana but set off on Hamilton were the first white women to enter the Willamette Valley. It is said that Rachel Beardsley Beers, our great-great-great-grandmother, was the first white woman to step foot in the Willamette Valley. Anna Maria Pittman, who arrived on the same ship, married Jason Lee soon after her arrival. Rachel had brought with her a cutting of her favorite rose. She presented it as a wedding gift to Anna Marie Pittman and Jason Lee. It is known as the Mission Rose. The roses once grew around the Willamette Mission marker, and they directly ascended from that original start. Mom was very proud that her great-great-grandmother was known for bringing the Mission Rose to Oregon. Alanson spent most of his first summer in 1837 transporting goods from the Diana up the Willamette River on a small boat to Salem. The mission site was selected by John McLaughlin, the chief factor, but Jason's guide suggested a more southerly route as the Indians to the north were combative. Lee accepted his recommendation. It is a site among the melons and cucumbers of the former Astorian Joseph Jervis. The land was plentiful of natural food, especially fish such as salmon, wild game, berries, wapato, a root resembling potatoes, and water and game fowl. Horses were plentiful and timber was in abundance. Later, flooding would reveal that the site was perhaps not such a good selection. Alanson and others built a log house and a shop at the mission. He then began to work as a blacksmith for the mission, making nails and other hardware for new buildings and the mission farm. He helped build several mills, one now known as Mill Creek, and additional homes for the newly developing community. At the age of 33, he was an enthusiastic worker for the mission efforts. With reinforcements, the energized Lee expanded the mission and opened a reinvigorated school named the Indian Manual Training School. He began to advocate for white settlement and a territorial government. Spanish cattle was introduced into Oregon in 1836. $2,800 was raised to purchase a herd of 500 to 800 head, but they were not allowed to be slaughtered. Their purpose was to multiply and lend to settlers to begin new herds. In 1839, they were still not allowed to be slaughtered. A few years later, 4,000 sheep and 2,000 horned cattle were also purchased for the mission from California with a permit with Mexico. 1 year after Jason Lee's marriage, while he was in Missouri presenting a petition from the Americans in Oregon asking for protection from the British, he received word that his wife had died in childbirth. This petition marked Lee's transition from being a missionary to becoming a colonizer. Lee returned to Oregon 2 years later after he had married Lucy Thompson from New York. While traveling, Lee raised money to buy the Oregon School building, and in 1842 he helped form a chapter for a new school for settlers' children known as the Oregon Institute, now known as Willamette University. It was the first school for white Americans established west of Missouri. It became the first college in the Oregon Territory. Alanson served as a member of the board at Willamette University until his death and served as treasurer for a number of years. Willamette University was not only was founded in the early days of Oregon Territory, but it played an important role in developing the West. When it was founded, Portland, Seattle, and Tacoma didn't exist. The university is closely associated with the beginning of law and government over a very vast region. It educated many of the Northwest's first leaders, artists, and business people. It was the first law school in 1883 and the first school of medicine in the Pacific Northwest. The original building, first occupied in 1844, was a 3-story building. It served the community, the school, and housed the first session of the legislature meeting in Salem and the first court in the territory under the United States auspices. In 1841, the Willamette River flooded the original mission site, prompting a move to nearby Chemeketa. Jason Lee chaired the 1841 meeting in Champouie to lay out how they might accomplish organizing a governing body for the territory. While the missionaries failed in their primary task of converting Indians, they succeeded in providing a foundation of order for white settlement in Oregon. By 1842, almost all the Indians in the Willamette Valley were dead because of diseases brought to their homelands by white missionaries, mountain men, sailors, and settlers. The missions in western Oregon no longer had any reason to exist. Some of them degenerated into crass commercialism before being shut down. On May 2nd, 1842, a large group of missionaries and other European American settlers gathered to decide the future of the Oregon Territory. After a spirited debate, a slim majority voted to form Oregon's first provisional government, laying the groundwork for Oregon's statehood. It was the first government formed west of the Mississippi River. The Oregon Territory included what is now Oregon, Washington, Idaho, as well as parts of Montana and Wyoming, stretching from the Pacific Ocean eastward to the Continental Divide. Alanson Beers, my great-great-great-grandfather, was chosen for the Legislative Committee of 9 to draft the original laws of the provisional government. These laws were used in the new country for many years. Then, on July 5, 1843, Alanson was chosen by the members to be the chairperson of the Judicial Committee. Rivalry among the mission, the settlers, and the mountain men fractured the interest of the group of men who wanted a provisional government. As a result of the rivalry, an executive committee of 3 was chosen instead of a single governor. Alanson was elected as the representative of the mission faction of the first executive committee, along with David Hill and Joseph Gale, each whom represented the other factions. This executive committee exercised the full powers of governor. Jason Lee's advocacy to build a thriving American community in the Willamette Valley was at odds with the Methodist Mission Board to educate and convert Native populations. Lee was replaced in July of 1843 for not converting enough Indians to justify the vast expenditures needed to maintain the missions. Lee was in Hawaii when he learned of this. He spent the next 2 years of his life seeking vindication. He died in Canada on March 2, 1845, while visiting a sister. His body was returned to Salem in 1906. The first order of business for the new executive committee was organizing military forces to deal with the 1844 Indian encounters at Oregon City. Alanson was instrumental in forming the first military organization in the Pacific Northwest. In 1844, the mission was reorganized. Lay workers were given the option to receive passage money to return to their former residence or an equivalent value. Alanson chose to take the farm where he had been living, the farming equipment, blacksmith shop, and $1,000 as settlement to remain in Oregon. The farm was about 10 miles south of Salem and about a mile from the Willamette River. The land option was available to all those working at the mission when the mission dissolved. Most early pioneers had also claimed land, and their claims were recorded. However, since there was no recognized government, the claims had no legal standing. When Oregon became a territory and then state, the early legislature chose to honor these land claims. These land claims were known as donation land claims, or DLCs. The land claims were recognized and filed before any of the later Homestead Act claims. Alanson's DLC was known as Mission Bottom and included the mission hospital site. At the end of 1845, Alanson helped lay out the town of Butteville with George Abernathy, who later became the first governor of Oregon. This early town survived the 1961 flood. Today, if you visit the Champoeg State Heritage Area, you can take the park trail along the east side of the Willamette River 4 miles to Butteville. The historic Butteville store is possibly the oldest operating store in Oregon. The store is the last commercial vestige of the once thriving Willamette River community. In 1846, in partnership with Abernathy, Alanson purchased the Island Mills at Oregon City. He took over the credits and liabilities of the mill. It was named Oregon Milling Company. They filled orders for lumber and lath and were a flouring mill. The mill was on land that Dr. John McLaughlin originally claimed. Alanson worked tirelessly for the Manual Labor School for Indians, now known as the Parsonage, the Oregon Temperance Society for the Prohibition of Alcohol, and the Oregon Institute, now known as Willamette University. In 1846, the United States took full possession of lands south of the 49th parallel. In February of 1848, the U.S. and Mexico signed a treaty that ended the Mexican-American War. With American military forces occupying Mexico City and much of their nation, Mexico surrendered all of the states of California, Nevada, Utah, and most of Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, and some of Wyoming, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. In August of 1848, the U.S. Congress approved the formation of the Oregon Territory. Oregon City was the capital. James Polk was president. The new territory had a sparse population of American settlers. In December of 1848, President Polk announced the discovery of gold in the newly conquered California. The increase in population to discover gold was estimated at 700%, or some 90,000 immigrants from around the world. This brought new migrants to the Oregon Territory and provided an important and extremely valuable market for its agriculture and timber products. Initially, the Oregon Territory suffered population losses as people migrated to California, but the prosperous markets that the gold rush created caused additional settlement in the Pacific Northwest. It also led to firmer federal control of these newly conquered lands and the violent displacement of the indigenous communities. Eventually, these historical forces would lead to the Pig War conflict on San Juan Island. In 1850, the census count was 13,294 residents in the Oregon Territory, a considerable increase in a 2-year span. The U.S. and Great Britain signed the Oregon Border Treaty, which guaranteed the U.S. claims to land incorporated in the Oregon Territory. In 1851, more than 60 ferry and steamboat landings existed on the upper river above Willamette Falls in Oregon City, replacing earlier canoes and flatboat traffic at Obishaw's Landing. On September 14, 1851, Rachel died. There is a tombstone near Alanson's in Lee Mission Cemetery in Salem that's marked Beers. That may be hers. On February 19, 1852, in Oregon City, Alanson remarried Sarah Turman Smith. Just prior to his death, Alanson built a house which he wished to be used as a dormitory for the Oregon Institute. After his death, Willamette University purchased this house, calling it the Beers House. In recognition of his service to the Willamette University, each of his children received a 10-year scholarship to attend the university. On February 20th, 1853, at the age of 48, Alanson Beers died. At the time of his death, he was described as efficient, reliable, honest in all relations, winning the favor and confidence of all with whom he had intercourse. Research done on him in 1968 described him as a man who desired to be in command at all times to protect the people of the Willamette Valley. We hope you enjoyed our brief overview of the life of Alanson Beers, an American pioneer and politician in the early days of the settlement of the Oregon country. He played an important role in helping to found Willamette University, in drafting the original laws of Oregon's provisional government, serving as a chairperson of the Judiciary Committee, and as one of 3 members of the first executive committee, which held all the powers of a governor. We also hope you enjoy the segment where Gary will tell you about the life of E.E. Parrish.